Avatar: The Last Airbender was a mid-2000s children's television show chronicling the journey of Aang, a young superhero aiming to master control of the four elements. Set in a pseudo-Asian mythological world, Avatar leaned heavily on Eastern philosophy, drawing on ideas of balance and flow, harmony and self-restraint. The show presents these ideas visually, in the form of martial arts represented in the bending or telekinetic control of air, wind, fire, and earth. The most unique aspect of the show, however, is its pacifist superhero. Aang, despite being the most powerful being in his world, or because of it, refuses to use his powers to kill. Instead, he uses his powers to disarm his enemies, to immobilize them, and to redirect their attacks away from harm. In pursuing a form of pacifism, Aang brings up an important question that we should ask of every superhero film. If the heroes are so powerful, then why are they killing anyone at all? Why aren't they using their powers to bring people together and to rehabilitate their enemies? This is the philosophy of pacifism, according to Avatar: The Last Airbender. The story of Avatar begins with Aang, the newest Avatar, awakening from a deep slumber after being frozen in ice for 100 years. He wakes to a world at war with the imperialist Fire Nation seeking control of the four nations, in other words, world domination. One of the four nations, the Air Nomads, have already been wiped out. The Fire Nation have destroyed them in a genocide. Aang is the last remaining member, and therefore the only person in the world capable of controlling the air with his mind. His fighting style is thus different to any other character in the show. As an air wielder, he is shown to redirect energy away from himself through centrifugal motion. The fact that he is an air wielder is significant to his portrayal of his form of pacifism. The element of air is shown to be about flow and balance, counterflow and counterbalance. Visually, this is depicted with the Chinese martial arts style Bagua, originating from the same school as Tai Chi. Bagua is a martial art that focuses on a similar centrifugal motion. The practitioner walks in a circle constantly, working through rapid changes in direction and force. Aang struggles with the idea of using his power of air against his enemies. Even when pushed to do so, he refuses to kill anyone. Consider it, this is a character whose entire people have been killed off in a genocide, yet he refuses to punish his enemies in the same vein. He has enormous power, but what makes him a hero is his refusal to use it. Avatar reflects an active version of pacifism, where force can be used for self-defense and for the maintenance of peace, but not for killing. This is different to other modern films, where violence is frequently shown as justified and necessary, especially by those who are already extremely powerful. Consider the last Star Wars trilogy. In the first reboot film, we are introduced to the idea that stormtroopers, the previously robotic-looking legions of nameless soldiers, are both human and capable of rehabilitation. A central character, Finn, is shown to learn the error of his ways and reform into a hero through the first two acts. By the end of the same movie, however, a giant space installation filled with thousands of stormtroopers is destroyed by the heroes of the film. The heroes commit an act of mass destruction against those who have been proven capable of reform, and yet are celebrated for this by the audience. Acts of extreme violence and genocide are surprisingly common in superhero films. In the 2013 Superman reboot, for instance, the hero kills an entire alien species, committing genocide whilst the audience again is primed to applaud. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the kill counts of each hero can be graphed Visually, seen as such, the number of kills rises dramatically when the heroes eliminate entire armies or cities at once, using bombs or other weapons of mass destruction. Again, these are meant to be the good guys. Modern myths are steeped in violence and destruction, reflecting a dismissive and often condescending understanding of the philosophy of pacifism in pop culture. It is commonly said that pacifism is naive or childish, so perhaps it is not surprising that we need a children's television show to prove this wrong. Superhero movies endorse the idea that the most powerful people on Earth should be capable of wielding violence, killing thousands, and committing genocide, and should be celebrated for doing so. Despite their power, the films seem to suggest, they have no choice but to be violent. But where does this idea come from? To a large extent, it comes from pacifism having a bad PR campaign. The philosophy has a long and troubled history in the West. It rose to prominence and to some extent peaked at the end of World War I. Following the destruction of an entire generation of young, mainly men during the war, the Allied nations rallied together to create the League of Nations. The League's purpose was to prevent another world war by facilitating diplomatic dialogue and thereby creating world peace. In theory, the League was a great idea. In practice, it excluded the United States and even more ominously, Germany. Without these two countries at the table, the League was doomed to failure from the start. A lesson from history is that pacifism only works when the enemy is in the room, when everyone has a seat at the table to negotiate. In the 1930s, the Nazi regime came to power, and so began the remilitarization of Europe. At the time, numerous political figures, scientists, and writers still believed in pacifism. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler and signed the Munich Agreement, trying to appease Germany in exchange for peace. Hitler ignored the agreement by invading Poland and France and plunged the world into a Second World War. Chamberlain became a laughingstock of the Western world, and the idea of pacifism, negotiating for peace, became the punchline of a joke. Comic books, which sprung up in the decades following World War II, showed violence as a necessary force against tyrannical supervillains, people who continually wanted to destroy the world. The only way to keep them in check, the comics always seemed to suggest, was to kill them. Spoilers ahead. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang is faced with a character who closely resembles Hitler. Ozai, the leader of the Fire Nation, is an imperialist seeking to control the whole world using the destructive power of fire. In his final confrontation, Aang is troubled with the idea of killing Ozai. Aang has been raised to respect all life and feels that killing him will make him succumb to the worst impulses he has been fighting against. Instead of killing him then, he immobilizes him, taking away his power to use fire. The equivalent would be to remove the cannons of the Death Star without killing anyone inside. Demilitarization, or disarming oneself and one's enemy, is an active form of pacifism that aims to end war not through violence and death, but through the prevention of violence and death. In our new age of superhero movies, packed with violence and gore, we have reached a point where we are suffering from a failure of the imagination. We can no longer imagine powerful pursuing pacifism. When we picture superheroes as people who use violence routinely on our behalf to defend us, to defend our way of life, we justify the use of violence by the powerful in our society against those who are weaker than them. We justify war of strong nations against the weak. If our modern mythologies reflect our society, then what does that say about us? What does it mean when we no longer question genocide or mass destruction shown on screen, but instead clap and applaud for the heroes who committed.